I make my first round before dark, because dark changes the shape of simple things. Barracks 1 through 5 sit in a row, doors facing the ridge, windows curtained with frost. I log roof load. Note which vents are half choked with rime. Thump each propane bottle with my knuckle, out of habit. The numbers are steady, the sounds are not. Barracks 2 has the Kowalskis. Their porch light is a yellow bruise on the snow. When I knock, warm air hits my face. It smells like tomatoes and cumin and wood smoke. Helen is at the stove in a sweater with the elbows gone. She twists the gas knob past what any sane person would call enough. The blue flames lift and shiver, taller than they need to be. "Come in, David." Her hand trembles, but she keeps it on the pot. "You look frozen. Sit, eat." "I'm good," I lie. "Still got the rest of my checks." She ladles chili into bowls like she's building a barricade. Mr. Kowalski, big shoulders, gray mustache, hiking socks, sets a third bowl anyway. "We've got plenty," he says. My wife cooks like there's a shift coming off the line. His smile doesn't make it to his eyes. The little wall thermometer by the door reads 72. The place feels hotter because I've been outside too long. My face prickles as the blood comes back. I take off my gloves but not my jacket. She notices. "You can hang that," she says. "I won't be long," I say. "Just checking vents and lines." Her hand tightens on the spoon. The flame flutters higher as if it's listening. "Leave it," Mr. K murmurs, and she backs the knob down a hair. The burners hiss like they're impatient. We sit. I accept a spoonful because refusing makes people nervous. It's good, heavy, sweet, a little too salty. It warms the tongue and goes down like a promise. "How's the wind?" Mr. K asks. "Down for now," I say. "Tomorrow's supposed to dump." He nods at the pot. "The kid said chili smells good," he says. "Too casual. Something climbs my back like a cold hand." "What kids?" He glances at the window. It's a pane of white. Heard them a little earlier, just outside, laughing, tapping on the glass. One of them said Helen's chili is the warmest he smelled all winter. He half smiles. "Flattery gets you chilly in this house." I set the spoon down. "What time was this?" Helen answers without looking at me. "A little after 10, they were singing that old song." Her voice goes soft, like maybe saying it too loud would make it truer. "Ring around the rosy." Her hand turns the gas up again without meaning to. I watch the flame. Blue. Too clean. "We get echo up here," I say, keeping my tone even. Rule number 3 lives behind my teeth. If you hear children after 10 p.m., it's the wind. Do not say otherwise. Could be the vent stacks. Sound carries strange over snow. She gives me a look that says she's not stupid. Echo doesn't knock, she says, and it doesn't ask for chili. Mr. K puts his hand over hers. "Let the man do his job." I nod like that helps. Stand up like I wasn't about to stay. "Keep the door locked," I say. "If anyone comes back, you call me on channel 7. Do not open for anyone you don't recognize." "You think there's someone out there?" she asks. "There's always someone out there," I say, because that answer covers a lot of ground. I put my gloves back on. The heat by the door hits my face again, and I can feel the room pulling at me, offering simple things: food, chairs, conversation. I close the door on it before I want to. Outside bites my lungs like I've never breathed before. The sudden cold puts a headache right behind my eyes. I key the radio anyway, low. "Caretaker to 2. Keep it locked, copy?" "Copy," Mr. K says, voice steady. In the background I hear the soft, wet sound of ladles, and the faint sizzle of a burner turned too high again. The porch steps complain under my boots. I sweep the deck with my light. Snow has drifted against the threshold, crust thin on top. And there, half pressed into it, lies a hard hat so small it could sit on my palm. White plastic gone gray with time. A circle of silver dust around it, like a halo that settled and never got disturbed. I crouch. The pressure in my left ear changes, clicks, doesn't clear. The porch planks vibrate like an engine idling far away. The railing gives me a little harmonic when my sleeve brushes it. My CO badge stays quiet. Does it make me trust it more? I brush frost off the hat with a gloved thumb. The light finds a gouge on the brim. Someone carved 17 into the plastic with a nail or a knife, and then rubbed the cut full of metal dust so it shines dull as pewter. The strap is missing. The inside smells faintly of mice, and something sweet that shouldn't belong to mice. I don't touch it with skin. I take a photo on my phone because records are what you have when memory gets slippery. The lens breathes a film of fog that I wipe away with the back of my wrist. My breath drifts toward the door, the way it did in my shack. Like the warm is pulling. From inside the barrack, the stovetop pops. A wave of heat pushes out from under the door. It lifts the snow in a slow curl. The way a hand lifts a blanket, the warm air licks at my shins. Then sheet flows along the porch, down the steps and into the yard. As if it's being shown where to go. It carries the smell of cumin and tomatoes and a little scorched gas. It also carries the kind of attention you can't point at. A sense of faces turning in a dark room when someone opens the door. "David?" Helen's voice comes through the wood, muffled. "You still there?" "I'm here," I say, and hate how relieved I sound. "Keep the gas at a normal level. Turn on the space heater, not the stove. It's safer." "It's safer for you," is what I don't say. "It's safer for all of us," is what I mean. "Okay," she says, slow like she hears the part I didn't say. The burner noise drops. The porch stops humming. I pick up the small hard hat with a rag, set it on the rail. The snow under it shows no dent, as if it didn't weigh anything. I sweep the deck, erasing the ring it made. More for my nerves than any effect on the world. On the far side of the yard, between barracks, something like a laugh moves through the vent air and becomes wind again. Words ride edges of it and lose their shape at once. My name lives in there somewhere, or I imagine it does because the rules told me it would. I do not answer. Do not answer if they call your name. Number 5 has teeth in it tonight. I move on, counting vents as I go, because numbers are rails you can hold. When the ground goes soft, 6 on barracks 3, 6 on 4, 6 on 5. I know which ones ice will grab first when the temperature falls, and circle them in my head for 317. Before I turn the corner, I look back at 2. Warm light rims the curtain. Heat still breathes from the door. Less now, but there. It spreads thin across the porch and out into the dark, like a bait line in water. "Keep them fed with respect and distance," the new ink said. "What they want most is what you cannot give, warmth." It occurs to me that a stove can give it just fine, if it's left open long enough. The ridge carries sound strange after sundown. A shovel dropped 2 barracks over, slams thin as glass. While my own boots vanish into the snow, I log as I walk, roof load on 3, ice choking 2 vents on 4, propane bottles steady by weight but not by sound. Numbers stay in line. The noises do not. Barracks 2 shows yellow first, porch light bleeding soft into frost. The Kowalskis keep it burning whether they're awake or not, a habit they carried up here. From somewhere warmer, their porch light is a yellow bruise on the snow. When I knock, warm air hits my face. It smells like tomatoes, cumin, and wood smoke. Helen is at the stove in a sweater with the elbows gone. She twists the gas knob past what any sane person would call enough. The blue flames lift and shiver, taller than they need to be. "Come in, David." Her hand trembles, but she keeps it on the pot. "You look frozen. Sit, eat." "I'm good," I lie. "Still got the rest of my checks." She ladles chili into bowls like she's building a barricade. Mr. Kowalski, big shoulders, gray mustache, hiking socks, sets a 3rd bowl anyway. "We've got plenty," he says. "My wife cooks like there's a shift coming off the line." His smile doesn't reach his eyes. The wall thermometer by the door reads 72, hotter than it should be. My face prickles as the blood comes back. I take off my gloves, but not my jacket. She notices. "You can hang that," she says. "I won't be long," I answer, just checking vents and lines. Her hand tightens on the spoon. The flame lifts higher as if it heard. "Leave it," Mr. K murmurs, and she backs the knob down a hair. The burners hiss, impatient. We sit. I take a spoonful, because refusing makes people nervous. Heavy, sweet, a little too salty. It warms the tongue and goes down like a promise. "How's the wind?" Mr. K asks. "Down for now. Tomorrow's supposed to dump." He nods at the pot. "The kid said chili smells good," he says, too casually. Something cold crawls my back. "What kids?" He glances at the window. Frosted white. Heard them earlier, just outside, laughing, tapping on the glass. One of them said Helen's chili is the warmest he smelled all winter. He half smiles. Flattery gets you chilly in this house. I set the spoon down. "What time?" Helen doesn't look at me. "A little after 10, they were singing. That old song." Her voice is low, like louder would make it real. "Ring around the rosy." Her hand turns the gas up without meaning to. Blue flame. Too clean. "We get echo up here," I say. Rule number 3 lives behind my teeth. If you hear children after 10 p.m., it's the wind. Do not say otherwise. Vent stacks carry sound funny over snow. Her look says she knows better. Echo doesn't knock, she says, and it doesn't ask for chili. Mr. K covers her hand again. "Let the man do his job," I nod. Stand like I was leaving anyway. "Keep the door locked. If anyone comes back, call me on channel 7. Do not open for anyone you don't recognize." "You think there's someone out there?" she asks. "There's always someone out there," I say, because it covers enough ground. I put my gloves back on. The heat by the door hits me again. Food, chairs, voices, it all pulls. I shut the door before I want to. Outside bites my lungs raw. A metallic film on my tongue. Headache edging in. Left ear clicking like it wants to equalize. I key the radio low. "Caretaker to 2. Keep it locked. Copy?" "Copy," Mr. K says. In the background, ladles scraping. A burner still running too high. The porch steps complain under my boots. I sweep the deck with my light. Snow crusted against the threshold. And there, half pressed into it, lies a hard hat small enough for my palm. White plastic gone gray. A faint halo of silver dust around it. I crouch. Pressure shifts. Ear clicks. Doesn't clear. Porch planks hum like an engine idling far off. My CO badge blinks once, thinks about alarming, then stays quiet. Doesn't make me trust it more. I brush frost off the hat with a glove. A gouge on the brim. Numbers carved crude, 17. The cuts packed with metal dust, strap gone. Inside smells faintly of mice and something sweet that doesn't belong. I don't touch it bare. Snap a photo, timestamp, log to my channel notes. Photos buy you a second when paper doesn't. From inside, the stovetop pops. A wave of heat pushes out from under the door, curling snow up slow like a blanket being pulled. It hits my shins, then sheet flows down the steps into the yard, like a bleed-off line someone forgot to shut. It carries cumin, tomatoes, a hint of scorched gas. It also carries attention, faces turning in the dark. "David?" Helen's voice muffled through wood. "You still there?" "I'm here," I say, hating the relief in my tone. "Keep the gas normal. Use the space heater, not the stove. Safer." "Safer for you," I don't add. "Safer for all of us." "Okay," she says. Burner noise drops. Porch hum fades. I lift the small helmet with a rag. Set it on the rail. Snow underneath shows no dent, no weight. I sweep the deck, erasing the ring it made. More for me than anything else. Out in the yard, between barracks, a laugh moves through the vent air and thins back to wind. Words ride the edge, then lose shape. My name hides in there, or I imagine it does, because the rules warned me. I do not answer. Do not answer if they call your name. Rule number 5 has teeth tonight. I move on, counting vents. 6 on barracks 3, 6 on 4, 6 on 5. I mark which will ice first by morning, and circle them in my head for 317. Before I turn the corner, I look back at 2. Warm light bleeds the curtain edges. Heat still breathes out. Thinner now, but steady. It spreads into the yard like a bleed-off left open. Keep them fed with respect and distance, the new ink warned. What they want most is what you cannot give, warmth. And it occurs to me, a stove will give it just fine, if left open long enough. Marcus showed up before noon, hauling a tripod and 2 battered cases. He didn't ask if he could set up, just trudged past me toward the ridge, where the vent stacks caught the crosswind and made their low organ notes. He carried himself like he belonged. And maybe he did. His badge said geologist, subcontracted, though not through Silverton. He planted the tripod on packed snow, metal legs squealing. From one case he pulled a thermal camera, from the other, a seismograph printer with a roll of paper, tight as a spool of banding wire. The camera whirred, lens cycling. The printer coughed once and steadied, green diode blinking like a pulse. "Baseline's off," he muttered, more to the air than to me. "They're pulling heat." I didn't ask who they were. I watched the screen. The feed showed the ridgeline in orange and yellow. Cold stone still holding sun. Against that, 7 shapes darker than the snow. Not shadows, not absences either. They moved slow, drifting toward shaft number 6. Each one bled the background color around its edges, as if it was eating the warmth, instead of giving any. Marcus's gloves squeaked on the camera grip like he was holding a live thing. His breath fogged quick, shallow. "Not ghosts," he said, "just colder than void." The printer jammed halfway through a strip. The ink had stiffened in the cold. He cursed, tore it loose, held the cartridge between his palms, like he was setting charge caps. A line of steam curled up. The smell of ozone and stone-heated air rode the gust. I swallowed. Remembered the folder's last page. They remember being alive. Sometimes memory makes them hungry. What they want most is what you cannot give. Warmth. The rule rose in my throat before I could stop it. "They remember," I said out loud. Marcus shot me a look. "Remember what?" "Nothing." My jaw tightened. I adjusted my CO badge, though it hadn't beeped once. Didn't matter. The silence of a detect doesn't prove safety. He fed the cartridge back in. The printer stuttered, then began its steady rat-a-tat. Line after line spooling down the board, black ink cutting white paper. At first it read like noise. Then the peaks started to repeat. 1, 7, 1, 7. Not numbers printed clean, but the spacing of the lines, long, short, low. The rhythm of Morse. My molars ached the way they had when the fluorescent in the shack buzzed, the kind of frequency that sets nerves off by itself. Marcus tore off the strip, held it between us. Ink bled where his thumb pressed. "Coincidence?" he asked. "Call it noise if you want," I said. My voice sounded wrong in the open air. We stood there longer than made sense, just listening. The camera kept its hollow figures, all 7 drifting, but never reaching the shaft mouth. The printer fed out another strip. The same sequence. 1, 7, 1, 7. The wind swung, carried vent stack breath over us. Low, organ deep. My left ear clicked again, failed to clear. Marcus tucked the strip in his jacket like proof. His hand shook, just once, before he jammed it into his pocket. "Baseline's off," he repeated, quieter, "and it's not the ground moving." The LED on the printer pulsed green. The smell of ozone hung around us longer than it should have, as if the air itself had been scorched. The paper trembled in his glove, like it knew it was supposed to be read. The smell of stone too hot to touch hung between us. Waiting. I set my watch for 3:15 and slept in my boots. Because rule number 2 doesn't care how tired you are. When the alarm trilled, the shack was 42 degrees by the wall thermometer. My breath smoked straight to the door, like the room still remembered last night's pull. I killed the heater to hear better. The place answered with the small noises of a winter building. Studs ticking, a pipe shrinking in its bracket, the cap lamp knocking once on its nail. As the wind leaned. 317 belongs to counting. I keyed the radio to 7. "Caretaker moving. Copy in barracks 2? Mr. K's voice came back, gravel soft, sleepy. "Copy. Locked up. Keep it that way." Outside, the world had that blue that isn't a color so much as a decision. My CO badge sat calm against my chest. The ridge said nothing. I started the count. Barracks 1 first. 6 vents across the long wall, square louvers rhymed and dull. I swept the beam and touched each with light. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Rule number 2, lives in the mouth. Say it. 6. The wind ran past indifferent. Barracks 2, the Kowalskis, showed the same. 6, the kitchen window filmed white from inside. A thin seam of heat still bled the threshold, and sheet flowed off the porch in a tame ribbon. The burners weren't raging anymore. Good. Barracks 3 and 4, 6 and 6. Fans asleep. Frost patterns like fern bones over the tin. The quiet had weight. Even the snow squeaked less underfoot, like it had been told to hush. Barracks 5, Marcus's temporary, sat darker. He'd tilled his land to keep the instruments honest. 6 vents. My left ear clicked. Didn't clear. Baseline? I asked without meaning to. He must have been listening. His voice came from the snow shadow beside the porch steps. Still off. Printers cold, cameras on standby. He fell in next to me like a second thought. Shoulders dusted white. You really do this at exactly 3:17? Exactly, I said. Count 6. If you count 7, you go home and wait for daylight. What happens at daylight? You're not dead, I said. It wasn't a joke. We cut around the office last. The low log building that wears 2 jobs, front desk by day, my bunk by night. Single story, gable roof, a run of 3 vents on the long wall, 2 on the short, 1 over the bath, 6. I breathed easier out of habit. Then the light changed, not brighter, wrong. A faint wash lifted inside the gable, up near the peak where timber met tin. The frost took it like phosphor, blue-green, the kind you see on old exit signs. My beam went there and flattened. The glow pulsed once, soft and slow, the way lungs do when someone's almost asleep. Don't, I said, because Marcus had already started to step under the eave for a better angle. He froze. You seeing that? I'm not seeing it, I said, meaning I refused to. I counted again to make the brain shut up. 1, 2, 3 down the long wall. Turn the corner. 4, 5, bathroom louver 6. And then, up in the gable where there has never been a vent, an opening. Darker than the wood around it until the blue-green found it from within and made it a shape. 7. Pressure took a set behind my eyes so fast my vision blurred. My left ear tried hard to equalize and failed, with a click that sounded like a tiny door closing. The radio on my shoulder hissed to squelch, then quieted, as if it had been glared at. Don't get closer, I said. Rule number 2. Or, Marcus said carefully, we document what the hell this is. He eased a thermal pocket scope from his jacket and lifted it. His gloved thumb found the power. The little fan inside whirred up. A mosquito in winter. He squinted, then swore under his breath. There's a cavity behind that panel, cold as empty. He angled. It wasn't there yesterday. It isn't there now, I said. My voice sounded thin. The glow deepened, as if the thing behind the siding had taken a longer breath. The frost around the opening crackled and fell in a ring of glitter. A sound came with it, soft, papery, like a moth working in a lampshade. I felt the hair along my wrists move inside my coat. Back up, I said. We go back to the shack. We're 50 feet from it. We can back up. I didn't raise my voice. I put the flat of my hand on his sleeve. Added pressure the way you do when the ground over a drift sounds wrong. The blue-green thinned for a heartbeat, then focused, tight as a pupil. In the opening, something slid forward, slow as an elevator with bad cables, smooth, convex, the color of coin underwater. It found the line of my headlamp and didn't reflect so much as drink. The center pinched smaller against the light instead of opening for it. Marcus forgot to breathe. That's an air louver, I said. And we're leaving. We stepped back together. The porch boards under the gable gave a small harmonic. The pitch you hear right before a fan starts, the same note, only backward. The glow dilated again. Wider now that my beam had moved off it, and the opening looked bigger by 1 shadow's worth, as if recognizing distance equals permission. I made the count out loud for the radio to hear, because saying things makes them true. Office has 6, I said. My teeth tried to chatter, and I made them stop. Repeat, 6. The new hole listened. We put 10 yards between us and the wall. The pressure behind my eyes eased enough that the world found edges again. Marcus kept the scope on his chest now, not raised. The blue-green in the gable ebbed, until the frost took back its own color, and the siding went to flat wood. No opening, just a place where your brain insists there was one. Bastard, he said to the dark. I couldn't tell if he meant me or it. Daylight? I said. If you want your pictures, you do them when I can count without lying. Behind us, the vent stacks let out a slow chord, as if something had removed its hand from the organ keys, one finger at a time. The radio gave a single pop. No voice. Then settled. My CO badge stayed green. And wrong. We walked away without turning our backs like it mattered. The snow kept its squeak to itself. When we reached the shack, I let myself breathe from my ribs again. Rule number 2 has simple words and sharp edges. Count 6. If 7, retreat to quarters and wait until dawn. The rule didn't mention the part where the 7th learns your beam and waits for the next time you look. The ridge wind carried powder across the yard in long veils. My boots hissed through it, lamp-catching angles of blown snow, and the silver flecks mixed in. Barracks dark behind me. Vents counted and logged. I should have gone back to the shack. Instead, I cut toward the service road, the one that drops down toward the rails. That's where I saw her. A woman stood at the bend, where the plowed track disappears into pines. Yellow raincoat, hood up, slick with ice in the beam. She wasn't shivering, arms at her sides, hands loose, like she'd been waiting long enough to stop pretending. She lifted her head when the light hit, face pale, features unreadable under the shadow of the hood. The coat crackled when she moved, but not in time with the wind. My lamp should have made her shadow trail behind. It didn't. Sir? Her voice had no cloud in the air, just sound. Do you know which way to the parking lot? Rule number 4 sat in my chest like a stone. If a woman in a yellow raincoat asks for help, point her to the rails. Do not follow. I raised my arm, pointed toward the switchyard, the main line that sloped away from the barracks. My fingers shook, but I held it straight. Down the tracks, follow them out. She didn't move at first. The hood tilted a fraction. Behind her, the snow swirled in small eddies, silver grit rising like something exhaled. Not that way, she said, and stepped closer. The crunch of boots never came. Only the faint swish of the coat, louder than it should be. That's wrong, isn't it the road? Her words tugged at me the way warmth does when you've been cold too long. Automatic, against your better sense. I forced my voice flat. Tracks are that way. Don't lose them. Something passed between us then. A recognition that I was inside the rule and she was outside it. Her head angled sharp, bird-like. The hood slipped, just enough for light to touch a cheek gray as furnace slag. No breath, no frost, and then she was gone. Not turned, not walked, just not. The beam slid through where she had been, and the only thing left was the sound, a faint rumble through the rails that cut the yard. So low it lived in the chest, more than the ear. The iron at my feet hummed, slashed like a cable under load. I swung the light down. Frost crust along the nearest tie shook loose, sifted white powder into the gap. The rails didn't move, but my bones swore otherwise. That vibration. The kind you only hear in a mine when ore cars are rolling in another drift. Except no cars have run here since '87. My cap lamp dimmed and flared. Dimmed and flared. Like it couldn't decide if there was something to see. From the corner of my eye, one of the vent fans on Barracks 5 ticked. Reversed 3 slow turns, then stalled with a hard clunk. The bearings squealed once, like an animal caught. Radio static filled one ear. Channel 7 open on its own. A voice wanted through, but never cleared the squelch. Just pressure on the line. I backed off the track, slow, keeping the beam steady. My boot heel brushed the ballast, and the hum in the rails dropped half a tone, like disappointment. The air smelled of oil long evaporated, and my tongue picked up iron, as if I'd bitten the metal straight. The fan across the yard creaked once more, blades twitching against the wrong wind, then froze for good. I made myself speak into the radio, because silence felt like permission. Caretaker to base, no movement on the road, vents stable. Lies are part of the job when the truth gets teeth. The vibration in the rails faded by degrees, until it was only my pulse left. I waited another full minute before turning my back. On the walk back, the snow gave under me without noise, like the yard was holding its breath. I logged the time, 2:46, and wrote it clean, subject in yellow coat. Directed to rails, non-compliant, no follow. The ink spread a little, silver shimmer caught in it from the dust on my gloves. I let it dry. And still, when I closed the ledger, I felt the low hum echo in the bones of my ribs. The way steel does after a train has already passed, and only the memory of its weight remains. It started with tapping, 3 knocks, even, against frozen dark. Then a pause, then 3 more, longer. Metal on metal, the kind you only hear in a shaft when men are alive down there. Signaling for the cage. Marcus lifted his head. Morse. We were holed up in the supply shed. Lantern down to a blue whisper. My watch read 1:40. The tapping came from shaft number 6. Steady as a metronome. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, SOS. My body wanted to move. Any miner does when you hear that call. But rule number 5 had teeth. Do not answer if they call your name. And rule number 3 still burned. If you hear children after 10 p.m., it's the wind. Marcus had the tripod in front of him. Mic to the ground, pencil racing. His thumb kept beating a counter rhythm on the frame. Tap. Pause. Tap. Tell of a nervous man. The tapping changed, slowed. Drew letters I recognized. DAV my name. The lantern hissed, my sweat froze where it beaded. Frost crusted my collar, catching silver under the wick. They're spelling you, Marcus whispered, his eyes too wide. The knocks shifted again. Quick. Hammer on rock tempo. Then giggles. Child giggles. Cut too short. The air smelled wrong, not wood smoke. Ozone, maybe. Or stone. Wet and burning. I clamped my jaw. Marcus leaned forward. If I just don't. They're trying to communicate. Don't. He flinched, but kept dragging lines across paper. The stylus danced, then flattened. The sound didn't. Now it was a chorus. Laughing. Feet scuffing frozen ballast. Hands slapping the tin siding. The shed walls shook until one syllable cut clean through. David? Rule number 5 screamed. Reflex pulled at my tongue anyway. I pressed my teeth till my jaw popped. Didn't breathe until my chest ached. Marcus sat stiff. Boot heel tapping. Too fast. The pencil point snapped. He sharpened it with his knife, without looking. The lantern guttered. My sweat flashed cold again, silvering the seams of my coat. Something heavy thudded the door. Not a child's hand. Wood flexed. Hinges whined. I set my hand on the axe by the wall, grip slick with condensation. When I closed it, the grain shifted. Not worn, not splintered, shifted. Dark grooves crawled under the skin of the hickory. Numbers 1, 7. They carved slow, as if an invisible tool bit. While I held it, I yanked back. The grooves stayed, packed with metal dust. Glimmering pewter under the last of the lantern. Marcus rasped. What the? The knock stopped. Silence. Not wind, not generator hum. Even the stylus froze mid-scratch. Then faint. A breath drawn in. Not mine, not his. The axe handle pulsed once, numbers glowing like veins, then dimmed. Marcus stood too fast, chair scraping. We can't. Sit. My voice cracked. He sat. We didn't move. Not until the lantern steadied. Not until the frost on my collar melted to sweat and ran down my neck. I checked the axe. Smooth wood again, but the raised feeling stayed. Scars under skin. I wrote it clean in the log, 155. Morse from number 6, shifted to children, attempted personal contact, no answer given, axe handle anomaly, 17 incised, metallic residue, vanished on secondary check. Closed the book before the ink dried. Didn't want to see if the lines kept writing themselves. The shed held heat badly, and the lantern's circle was shrinking. I kept the wick low to make it last. Every time the glass pinged, I thought the flame was ready to give out. Bootsteps in the snow stopped outside. Not hurried. Placed. A woman's voice came through the wall. Too even. I am Eleanor Henderson. The surname bent the air in the room. Henderson. The same as the ink on the old log. Marcus already had his recorder out, thumb sliding the switch twice before it caught. The red LED blinked. picked up his breath, then steadied. "State your name again," Marcus said, voice pitched flat. The microphone trembled because his hand did. He over-rotated the gain knob, feedback hissed sharp through his headset before he caught it. "I am Eleanor Henderson." Same cadence, like it came off tape. The voice didn't stay in one place, sometimes at the door, sometimes inside the studs, sometimes under the floor. My chest tightened. The shed smelled less like kerosene now, and more like rock after blasting. Ozone and wet stone burning at once. "Document everything," Marcus whispered. He set the unit on the bench, leaned close as though proximity would pin it down. The voice spoke again. 17 stayed. 17 kept warm. You read the book. You know the names." The lantern flame dipped when she said warm. My vision swam, a weight pressing from behind my eyes, as if my skull leaned forward of its own accord. "They remember," I said, quieter than I meant. Rule number 7 had lived in my mouth too long. Marcus looked at me like I'd handed her permission. "We can't just sit." My answer cut him. The flame stretched sideways, bent toward the door like a nail drawn to a magnet. The air in that line frosted, then cleared again, as if it couldn't decide which way to go. The voice softened. "You can share a little. Keep your space. We only want to feel alive again." My jaw locked until it popped. Pressure built in my ears, one click, then another, never equalizing. "No distribution," I said. Each word counted. "Heat is mine to assign." Marcus's knee bounced under the bench. His pencil lead broke. He sharpened it without looking. Blade quick and nervous. The silence outside felt held. Waiting. I risked a glance at the crack under the door. Something pale shifted across it. A hand, fingers dusted gray, nails worn blunt. The shape hesitated, like it knew it was being watched. Then the voice came through the wood itself. "Decide well. We're listening." Tone calm, flat, like minutes being read into record. The lantern glass pinged hard. A fissure ran top to bottom and the flame bent double, drawn forward. Shadows climbed the walls, not as cast shapes, but as liquid, pooling toward the ring of heat. For an instant I saw them in the distortion. Eyes silver, not reflecting, just pulling. No breath fogged from the gap under the door. Marcus half rose, then froze. His mic wire trembled from where it brushed his boot. I pressed him back down with a palm to the shoulder. "Do not answer again." My own voice clipped like it came from outside me. The wick guttered. The shadow at the crack flinched, then withdrew. The lantern recovered, crooked flame upright again. Halo smaller, but intact. The smell of ozone thinned, leaving just kerosene and sweat. Marcus scribbled the time, knife mark sharp. His notes shook, but the words stacked. I logged. Contact with entity identifying as Eleanor Henderson. Offered negotiation of heat. Refused. Anomalous pull on flame observed. Recorder captured voice. Outcome, unstable equilibrium. The final light in the shed felt wrong. Like it wasn't from the lantern at all, but from us being watched. We didn't open the door. We didn't need to. Her voice found its way through grain and nail holes, like sound remembers the path it took once. "Christmas Eve 1987, she said. "Blizzard. The boiler failed. Frank tried to fix it. I kept the children by the fire. We all went to sleep together. No tremor, no breath, just data." Marcus rolled the gain down, angled the mic toward the seam of the jam. "Names of the children," he said, professional to the last. "Peter, Ruth, Naomi, Daniel, Joy," the voice said. 5. The way she spoke the numbers made my jaw clench. The lantern wick bowed toward the door again. Pressure sat behind my eyes like a thumb. I logged the time. Kerosene smell thinning to that wet rock odor again. The post-blast kind, ozone and stone warmed wrong. Outside, the vent cord along the ridge dropped half a tone, then held. "We didn't understand what we were," she said. "Only that cold is a rule, and rules can be minded." We kept to our place. We watched. We wrote what helped the living keep clear of us. "The protocols," I said. My throat was dry. Yes, mine at first, then others learned the handwriting. Something like pride in that. But people change rules, they shorten them, they forget, ink fades, you see that too. Marcus shifted, knee knocking the bench. He steadied the recorder with 2 fingers. "What do you want from us?" he said. "Specific." "A little heat," she said. The flame bent harder, thin as a blade now. "A portion, at set times. We would not break your work. We would keep the guests safe while you slept. We would make this place a place people remember as kind in winter." Kind, the word hit wrong. Behind it, another sound started moving in the drifted yard, like cloth brushing wood at child height. It circled, slow. The studs whispered. Radio pop on my hip. Channel 7 cracked open. "David?" Helen's voice, thin with distance. "We just lost a strip of lights on our side. Is there extra power we can use for a bit? It's dropping in here." I looked at Marcus. He lifted his eyebrows. "Pressure." I thumbed transmit. 2. This is caretaker. Hold at current draw. Turn the stove off if it's on. Use the space heater only. Keep windows and doors sealed. I'll route power if I have to." Lies go down easier when they're halfway true. "Space heater's on," she said, like she wanted me to be proud. In the background I heard a burner tick-tick as gas tried to catch. "Not the stove, Helen," I said. "Copy?" "Copy," she said. The radio clicked dead. The shed felt smaller by 2 feet. Eleanor spoke into the new quiet. Voice where the door met floor. "You feel responsible for them. That is warmth too." I thought of the ledger, the out column blank. I thought of the little hard hat that had weighed nothing. I thought of my glove on that inspection pane weeks back. And the way something warm had pressed back, like a mouth through ice. Marcus said low, "Don't give her phrasing she can turn." His pencil hovered over the notebook. "Didn't touch it." I kept my words dry. "Parameters if we discuss this. I choose time, place, amount. No contact without my say. No approach to guest doors. If anyone in my care is harmed, we stop. And you go back to rules as written." "Parameters," she repeated, tasting the edges. Beyond the shed, the wind shifted, pushing a skiff of powder under the sill. It glittered dull, silver mixed into the white. "You're considering this," Marcus said, just above a whisper, like a man trying not to spook an animal, and failing to hide that it's him who's spooked. He set the recorder down too hard. The reel thumped. The lantern answered with a ping. "I'm considering not waking up to Mr. K. Blue around the mouth," I said, "and not finding Helen asleep under an open oven." I swallowed air that felt thin. "I'm considering we already broke rule number 1 once, and rule number 7 has our names in its teeth." Eleanor's voice softened, to a temperature I didn't trust. "You care in the right direction. That is all. Say the measure, David." I kept my eyes on the wick. The glass had fogged in a perfect oval, and stayed that way, like a face on the other side was breathing in, not out. 30 minutes, I said, careful. "In the yard, not in a building, no closer than the rail splice by the tool crib, no more than the heat I can spare standing there. We try it once. If anything goes wrong, anything, we're done." "Marcus," she said. It startled me she used his name. He looked at me. I could see the thought in him. How does she know? But names leak, we'd said them. He kept his voice dry. "This is a terrible idea," he said into the recorder. "But I am present." His legs stopped bouncing, his mouth set. He would witness, even if he couldn't bless. "Decide well," Eleanor said. "We're listening." The words came from the door seam, the floor seam, the nail hole by my head. Then in a tone that felt like a stamp, clear and cold. "Spoken conditions hold between our sides. Time, place, amount, agreed." The lantern reacted before my body did. The flame pinched to a wire, drew toward the crack under the door as if a small mouth pulled at it. The light went thinner, harder, until every edge in the shed had a knife on it. Heat left my cheeks like someone wiped it away with a cloth. "Verbal binding," Marcus said, horrified and fascinated in one voice. The wick sagged, the glass rang a clean high note. Shadows peeled off the corners, ran toward the door like water finds a drain. I put my hand over the chimney to kill the draft. Skin smarted in the heat, and then didn't. The pressure behind my eyes let go all at once. Like a valve was open somewhere I couldn't see. Half an hour. the voice said from the snow, at the splice. After that, the yard went back to wind, and the lantern flame stood up straight but smaller, as if a drink had been taken from it and paid for. Exactly the measure I'd named. I wrote that down too. The first thing was the sound, boots crunching snow where no boots were. Then the weight of eyes, not one pair, dozens. We stepped out into the yard, because the shed walls felt thinner than skin. The wind had died, but snow still sifted sideways, silver on black. That's when they came into the light we had left. 30 feet out, circling, they were child-sized mostly, some smaller. Skin wasn't skin, it was dust pressed onto shape, powder silvered into features that never settled. Where cheeks should have been, the glow of furnace slag, their eyes didn't reflect, they emitted. Mercury. Pooled and restless. One brushed against me, not hard, just fingers across my coat sleeve. The nerve endings in my arm lit like teeth biting tinfoil. I hissed. Jaw tight. The taste of metal filled my mouth. Tears came without my say, hot, then freezing on my lashes. Marcus staggered back, boot heel scraping a circle in the crust. He pulled the tripod close, like it could anchor him. "Don't let them touch you," he said, his voice cracked high. Not from fear, from static. The sound came out doubled, like a radio catching two stations at once. Eleanor's voice knifed through all of it. From everywhere, from none. "You spoke it," she hissed. "Half an hour, a measure given. You belong to it now, you promised." They pressed in tighter. The heat of our lamp drew them like moths. But what they wanted wasn't light. One leaned close enough that its breath frosted my collar silver. Another reached for Marcus's cheek. He swung the tripod like a pike, drove it into the snow between them. The LED winked, then held red, alarm instead of green. The cold wasn't weather anymore, it had a density. Pushing into ribs, making the heart clench like a fist. I could feel rule number 7, waiting to swallow me whole. My body tried to shiver, and I told it no. I stopped fighting the cold. Let it flood arms and chest. My lungs drew it in like brine, steady, no panic. I remembered the line in cursive. They remember being alive. And sometimes memory makes them hungry. If I didn't fight the hunger, maybe it wouldn't bite. Marcus wasn't there yet. His hands shook so hard the recorder rattled against his coat. He dropped to one knee, teeth chattering, trying to shield the propane heater with his body. "Help me," he barked. "Now." I moved on reflex, flipped the valve, thumbed the striker, twisted the fan switch. The unit coughed, spat, then ignited. A wash of amber tore open in the dark, real warmth, heavy and chemical, laced with the stink of propane and burned dust. The creatures recoiled, not far, but enough. Their faces cracked along seams as if light itself split them. Eleanor shrieked, sound doubled and trebled like sirens echoing through shafts. "You dare!" That's when the mind joined in. A siren. Real this time. An old rescue horn, bolted above the tool crib. Woke with a banshee wail. Not from us, from pressure. The wrong kind. The ground underfoot vented steam, hot enough to sting through boots. Not water, not quite. Amber fog roiled upward in sheets, curling with metallic tang, cutting through the silver cold like opposite charges meeting. The air itself had a border now, blue-white retreating before orange haze. Marcus's fan threw the fog outward in a ragged arc. It parted the child shapes, like plow blades through grain. They stumbled back, mouths open wide as if they'd forgotten how to scream. Eleanor's voice lashed once more, furious and broken. Stolen heat, stolen. But the fog carried weight, and it wasn't stolen. It was engineered, pressure-driven, mined. I grabbed Marcus by the collar, yanked him into the circle the fog had carved. "Hold the line," I snapped. His eyes were wild, rhymed with frost, but he planted the tripod, angled the fan, kept the fog moving. The yard shimmered, half silver, half amber, borderline between hunger and survival. The air buzzed like live current. And in that hum, I heard the rules again, as if the ledger itself whispered them back. What they want most is what you cannot give. Warmth. We hadn't given, we'd weaponized. The children shrank against the dark, pressed flat to walls, trying to flee into cracks that weren't big enough. Their eyes dimmed to dull pewter. Their voices twisted down into echoes too low to parse. The fog kept rising, cutting everything in half. My skin burned on one side, froze on the other. I clenched the heater handle until my knuckles cracked. Marcus whispered, "Jesus Christ." I didn't answer. My throat was ice. Amber clashed silver, cold clashed warm, and for a moment the mind remembered being both. Then the horn cut off. The fog thinned, leaving just our propane wash burning wrong in the snow, but I'd seen it. Saw them recoil before engineered heat. Saw that pressure could be turned, that rules had teeth, but so did machines. And I logged that, because logging is what survives. The heater died, like a candle pinched between wet fingers. One moment the little propane box was throwing a clean amber tongue into the shed. Next, it hiccuped and went black. The glass clicked as it cooled. The cold rushed in fast, smarter than wind. It carried the same sweetness as the ridge. Cough syrup at the back of the throat, and with it came a pressure shift. My left ear failed to equalize. "Eleanor," Marcus said, not loud, like he was testing the name in the new density of air. Outside, something answered, without words. The silver cold thickened. My breath went out and didn't come back. Rule number 7 has a weight. When they want warmth, they pull first. On the ridge, a second sound joined the cold. A soft, continuous rasp. I knew it before my brain caught up. Rope, paying off a drum. "The hoist," I said. We both moved. Shaft number 6 sat black and square against the snowfield. The chain across its header a line of teeth in the low light. The hoist frame at the apron was quiet, except for that wrong sound. Rope sliding itself toward the void. Steady, polite. Like it had been told there was work. The free end wasn't free anymore. A sensor bucket, Marcus's, bumped the timbers as it inched toward the lip. He jumped for the brake lever. Gloves squealed on paint. The drum kept turning. The rope brushed his sleeve and left frost like filings. "They're taking it," he said, voice thin. I put a boot against the drum guard. Hauled up on the mechanical brake, it groaned. Thought about stopping. Didn't. The rope paid out another half-foot. The bucket kissed darkness. Rule number 1 isn't complicated. Never enter shaft number 6 after sundown. The part we didn't write down but lived by: don't let anything from here go down there either. "Back," I said. I took the steel pin from the keeper chain, drove it into the brake ratchet. Teeth met steel with a noise that felt like biting your own tongue. The drum stuttered. The rope crawled, stopped. We both listened to the hole listening back. "Open the chain," Marcus said. Breath white and fast. "Just the top link. I can drop the bucket clean, get readings. If we know." No, I didn't raise my voice. I added my body to the lever, shoulder and hip, felt everything in me tremble with it. The rope creaked against itself. The drum complained, then settled. The bucket swung back a hand's width from the lip. "Data will keep us alive," he said. "Rules kept us alive long enough to argue about data," I said. "Pin stays." He stared at the chain across the header, every third link bright where something had polished it from the far side. He swallowed. "Fine." It didn't sound like agreement. It sounded like triage. The cold pushed harder. My CO badge chirped high, then glitched low, then went dumb again. Across the yard, the shed window showed our dead heater as a square of dull glass. In the barracks line, vent caps ticked as they cooled to the wrong temperature. We were about to lose the whole line if we let number 6 set the gradient. "Generator?" I said. "Main." We ran the cable back to the foreman's pad. The big unit sat under a tarp like a sleeping animal. I yanked the cover, checked oil with hands that had stopped belonging to me, primed with a thumb that didn't feel the button. Marcus worked the choke like he was setting charge caps. Precise, mechanical, angry. I pulled. The starter coughed coal smoke into the cold and died. I pulled again. On the 4th yank, the motor caught. Came up through an ugly note into a steady thump-thump. It got under my ribs, set them to agreeing with it. The housings vibrated. Heat sheets rolled off the fins. The air smelled like hot iron and a little ozone, rock warmed by sound. The amber came back in slices along the ground, thin at first, then thicker. We fed extension to the heaters. 1, then 2. Blue jets became working orange. The pressure in my head backed off half a notch. My pulse, which had been on a sideways step since the hoist moved, found the generator's beat and followed it. I could breathe again without having to think about it. Across from us, the children edged the amber like animals who know fence lines. They didn't hiss, they didn't speak. They made a sound that was wind until it wasn't, and eyes like nickel coins blinked in unison. Frost climbed my sleeves the way lichen climbs stone. When one of them reached its hand toward the nearest heater, the flame leaned away. Without losing height. Pressure bleed, Marcus, more to himself than to me. He cracked the heater valve a hair. The amber fog sheeted out low and broad. The gauge needle, kissed red, trembled. He cut it back before it could scream. "That's enough," I said. "Hold the line." The vent stacks along the barracks started to move wrong again. 1, 2, 3 laps backward, like we'd seen with the woman in yellow. And then, the generator's rhythm bit. Their blades found the right side of the air and took it. The organ note deepened, smoothed. The porch rails stopped singing in my bones. Something changed in the group by the hoist. One of the small shapes stepped forward until its boots were in the amber. The cold inside it made steam out of the heat. A thin white that smelled like coins in the mouth. Up close, the face under the knit cap didn't hold to any particular age for long. 5. Then 9. Then a teenager, starved thin. The eyes were not eyes until they tried to be. When they did, they were wet like mercury. It looked at the heater, then at me, then down at its own hands. It made a sound I had not heard from them yet. Not singing, not laughter, not a borrowed adult voice, just a child's breath. When they've run too hard and want to stop. "I want to," it said. The words didn't frost. "I want to stop." Behind it, Eleanor's shape sharpened. The silver in the air tightened like wire. "No," she said. Perfectly gentle, perfectly wrong. "We stay together." The child flinched, not from heat, from the word. It took a half step deeper into amber, like it was trying on the idea of being warm without being told. The vent fans chose our side. Their cords lined up with the generator's heart. My CO badge woke, began a steady metronome of normal. The hoist rope held under my whole weight and a steel pin went slack enough to tell my shoulders they could be my own again. Marcus didn't cheer. He didn't move. He stared at the kid like a man watching a landslide decide which way to fall. "We keep this going," I said, mostly to remind my mouth what orders sound like. "We hold it until dawn." The cold didn't leave. It did what pressure does when it meets a wall. It tested for weak seams. Far up the ridge, the mouth of number 6 took a breath you couldn't hear, so much as register in your teeth. I didn't look back at it. I looked at the child standing in the amber edge, at the small steam rising off its sleeves, and I held the lever that kept the hoist pinned, like my hand was part of the machine. The rules have teeth. Tonight, so did the equipment. For now, that was enough to keep us alive. I didn't shout. You don't shout at a mine. You give it clear instructions and hope it listens. "Eleanor," I said, steady, over the generator's thump. "You want heat? You get it on my terms. Release them. All 17. I'll hold the warm until dawn." The silver in the air tightened, like someone cinched a strap. The child in the amber edge watched me without blinking. Behind it, the line shifted. Small bodies angling left and right, like a flock deciding. "You bargain like a foreman," Eleanor said. Her voice came from every cold surface at once. "We keep our own." "You kept too many," I said. "Let them out." Silence. Not empty. Waiting. The organ note of the vent stacks found the generator and sat on it. Frost crawled another inch up my cuff. My radio clicked. Channel 7, low, with the little pop mine radios give when the air itself is a conductor. "David?" Helen, whispering like a hospital hall. "Someone's at our door. She says you sent her. Yellow coat. Says you told her to come here for a ride down. She's got a pot. Says it's for you. Marcus looked hard at me across the heaters. I hit transmit. Negative. Do not open. Lock the deadbolt. Step away from the door, both of you. Rule number 4, Helen. Repeat it back. A breath on the line. Then, if a woman in a yellow raincoat asks for help, point her to the rails. Do not follow. Do not open. Copy. Copy, I said. The relief made my knees feel like wood. On the yard, the child took another half step into amber. Steam came off its sleeves. White and thin, smelled like a handful of pennies. It looked down at its hands. Mama? The silver tightened to wire. Family doesn't separate, Eleanor said, and the last word had edges. The children winced as if it cut. 17, I said. Henderson shift, in and never out. This is the out. Something somewhere gave up pretending to be calm. The barracks line exhaled wrong. The bathroom louvers on 3 and 4 blew inward, as if someone outside had leaned in and shouted. Glass in their frames cracked like ice on a pond. On 5, the gable vent that had pretended to be a 7th last night flashed sick blue and then exploded outward, slats clattering into the yard. The sound hit the shed like a flat hand. My left ear popped. The heater flames bowed low but did not go out. Marcus had his bare hand on his unit's casing, feeling for that last half-turn of stability. He didn't flinch. He watched the gauge instead of me. Hold it, I said. He held. At the hoist, the rope went tight under my weight, as if something down there had jumped. The brake pin groaned. I leaned everything into it. The generator's beat climbed 1 notch as the auto governor took the load. The amber fastened itself flat along the ground. Less fog now, and more a carpet of wrong temperature. It cut the cold like a trench. Eleanor's voice, no louder, but now carrying the taste of old ash. You think heat makes rules. You think machines end promises. I think warmth belongs to the living, I said, and you forgot the difference. Something changed then, not in her, in them. The little one, cap pulled low, eyes trying hard to be eyes, turned away from the cluster, faced the shaft. It lifted a hand, like it was introducing itself to a door. 17, it said, almost to the rope. You can come. The yard listened. From the hoist shed high on the wall, the old helmet rack shivered. 1 hard hat fell and bounced flat, then another, then another. The sound dull through snow, not the toy size from the porch, full size. Different colors under years of gray. They rolled until rails caught them and held them on the gauge. A dotted line down into the weight of the mine. I counted without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 9, 10, 14, 17. On each brim, gouges I didn't put there. Some clean numbers, some just a line and a slash until the slashes added up. Dust puffed when they hit. The smell under it wasn't rust or leather. It was people who'd worked too hard for too long in air that kept its own counsel. David? Helen again, tinny, farther from the mic. She's knocking, says she's cold, says she found a little boy he needs. Stay back, I said, flat. That's not for us. I didn't have to say who it was for. The line at the shaft knew. The first figure broke away from the dark like a picture peeling off a window. A man in coveralls stiff with long cold, boots scuffed by ballast, a self-rescuer canister at his belt, bright under the dust. He stepped onto the apron and stopped like gravity had changed. The canister's lid popped by itself. With a tired little click, a breath of warm, not my warm, not amber. Something earned, pushed into his face. He coughed once, a human sound. Then blinked. His eyes were the bad silver for a heartbeat. And then they flushed with a darker color, the way metal does when you take the torch away. Behind him came a woman with a social worker badge, yellowed under the plastic. A priest with his collar threadbare, 3 men, then 2. Then an older woman with hair pinned like an era. They kept coming. All the sizes people come in. All wearing rescue devices that unsealed when they met the heat and hissed like polite snakes. 17 in all, counting out wrong breaths and then right ones. The amber bled up into faces and gave them back their edges. Eleanor's tone didn't rise. The temperature around us did. the kind that eats heat. Children, she said, still that terrible gentle. Back. Hands. Some of the small shapes moved, some didn't. The little one who had said I want to stop held still, like a nail does when a board splits and you don't want to make it worse. Marcus whispered, as if anything louder might tip it. We're past the crest. I didn't answer. I changed propane bottles with fingers that couldn't feel thread, heard the vent cord deepen another half step. The generator meta hummed through the frame into my chest, and under it, a second beat began to count. 17 lungfuls, landing close enough together to be a rhythm. On the radio, I heard Mr. K say, very calm, we're stepping away from the door now. Helen said, copy. The stove clicked down a notch. The way a person does when they decide to live. A crack like a rifle went off over the ridge. The chain at number 6 jerking against itself hard enough to wake old metal. The brake ratchet chewed the pin and held. I said thank you to whatever in me it was that had put it there, and didn't take my weight off the lever. The yard smelled like diesel, kerosene, sweat thawing out of old wool, and the faint sweet of a remembered Christmas that would not be repeated. The freed stood blinking in the amber, not quite believing light could sit on their faces again. Their breath made the air honest. The mine kept breathing through its pipes, but the note had changed. It matched a human tempo. 17 accounted, I said, to the radio, to Marcus, to the ledger in my head. We hold until sun. The cold didn't argue. It pulled at the edges and waited for a mistake. I logged the only thing that mattered. Warm field established. Occupants present. Containment holding. Out by the shaft, the last helmet stopped rocking and lay still. Brim toward the dark. The rail sang one pure tone and quit, like a line had finally been cut. The generator carried us into first light. Its pulse was tired but steady. Every piston slapped like a metronome, counting down what was left of the night. 17 stood in the amber field. Not marching. Not begging. Just standing. Blinking against dawn that still had no warmth in it. Steam lifted from their shoulders like dust shaken off a tarp. Their breath finally looked human, uneven, but theirs. Eleanor had not moved closer. Her shape was less shape now. Edges running, coat yellowed into smear. She stayed by the shaft like a shadow pinned where it had been drawn. The children clung to her legs, or what looked like legs. Silver eyes restless. She raised her chin once, surveying what had left her. You think release is mercy, she said. The tone wasn't angry. Worse. Flat. But release is hunger without end. One of the freedmen coughed into his sleeve, a sound as ordinary as a kitchen. It undercut her. He looked around at the yard like it was both new and hated. His eyes caught mine for half a second. Recognition. Then exhaustion swallowed it. I didn't speak to Eleanor again. Rules had covered that. Rule number 7, keep them fed with respect and distance. What they want most is what you cannot give. I wasn't here to give, just to hold until sun. The cold tried once more. A pressure drop swept the ridge, sharp enough to make my ear ring and my stomach cramp. The freed staggered. Marcus swore and bent over his gauge, tapping it as the needle swung wide, then settled back. The heaters hiccuped, but recovered. Eleanor thinned with the wave, coat flickering like a curtain in a draft. When the pressure equalized, she was dimmer. Almost gone. Her mouth shaped words without sound. I read them anyway, helped them remember. Then she broke apart. Light scattering like filings brushed off a magnet. The children with her blinked out the same way, leaving only the pipes moaning low, as if the mine itself had lost what it leaned on. The freed stared at the empty shaft. None stepped forward. They knew better. The radio crackled. Helen, David, are we clear? Her voice trembled, then steadied. We're clear here. Chilly's cold. That's fine. I answered. Containment holding. 17 accounted. Stay inside until I give release. Copy, she said. Mr. K in the background added, understood. The line clicked dead. Marcus sank onto a crate, rubbing his palms together like he could wake nerves that had iced. His gloves lay forgotten at his boots. He looked at the Freed like a scientist looks at data he doesn't yet believe. "They'll keep breathing?" he asked. "For now," I said. "As long as we keep the warm true." He nodded, not convinced. Neither was I. By mid-morning, the wind swung west, dragging brighter cold down the slope. The vent cords thinned, less organ, more ordinary drafts. The CO badge on my chest blinked, beeped, then went back to baseline. For the first time in hours, my lungs hurt in a normal way. We gathered the Freed into Barracks 3, the only one with glass still intact. They moved slow, like limbs were heavy in air that didn't answer to them. I set blankets over shoulders, rationed out propane from my stock, lit the heater low. Marcus found a tin of tea, brewed it black, served it without comment. One woman cradled the cup, like she'd forgotten what heat did. I logged each face, age, attire, condition. Names came haltingly, as if spoken across a gap of years. Henderson, Alvarez, Cho. Names the ledger had written in, but never out. By noon, Eleanor was memory only. The shaft mouth sagged under frost, chains hanging still, no voice called, no song carried, just the wind. County Dispatch got my report 3 days later. Once the road thawed enough for a snowcat, official line, mass CO exposure, hallucination, confusion, temporary psychosis. Shaft number 6 condemned, sealed permanent under state order. Unofficial, 17 walked out. Nobody on the crew could decide if they'd ever walked in. Paperwork won't settle it. I stayed through to spring. Someone had to keep the heaters true, keep the Freed anchored in chairs, blankets, tea, quiet. They learned small things again, how to sip without spilling, how to sit without swaying, how to hold a pencil long enough to write a name. Memory didn't come all at once. Sometimes it didn't come at all. That was fine. Warmth isn't about remembering. It's about staying. When the thaw broke the ridge and the county men came with trucks, I watched from the porch of the shack. The rusted sign at the gate had shed more paint. Under Silverton Mining Co., the older lettering showed through. Henderson Mineral Partners, 1987. Nobody mentioned it. They loaded the Freed careful, one at a time, wrapped in surplus wool. Some clutched their helmets, some wouldn't touch them. Marcus left with them. He didn't look back. I stayed. The foreman's shack needed a body in it, someone who knew the rules and didn't argue with them. The mine breathed softer now. 6 vents, no more. When the wind cut across them just right, the sound it carried wasn't hunger. It was laughter, not sharp, warm. It bent into the trees and was gone. I logged final, containment closed. 17 returned. Warm field dispersed, caretaker on site. The vent line echoed back once, clean and even. 6 voices only, mine held. Comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe to Dr. Noctis for more horror stories from the dark.